excited about this project that he's calling Synth when he first talked about it. But at that point, it was only an idea. And tonight, I'm excited that he can come and share with you some scaffolding to help the back end of building an AngularJS application. Before we get going, like we always do, a couple announcements. If you want to ask a question, it's going to happen on a live YouTube stream. So one of us will come to you with a form to fill out to say, yes, it's OK to have my comment put on YouTube. And I think you'll get a T-shirt for that. Also, when we're done, we'll be around for a while. There's many of us from the Angular team. Mishko is here, Igor, Tobias, and I'm here. And we'd love to chat with you. We'll have a little more time tonight than most, so we can answer questions and chat about things you're interested in. So on to announcements. So for in May, we had a couple releases. On the AngularJS side, we were a little more limited than most. We're thinking deeply about 2.0. And what you're seeing is a transition from doing a lot of stuff on the 1.2 branch, which supports IE8, to more and more on the 1.3 branch, where we're headed towards our next version on 1x. Some things, one of the important things, we've done a bunch of speed ups. We have a 10 times speed up for sharing childs from a scope class. Also on scope, we've got a way to observe a group or a set of expressions. We have this new thing on the injector so that if you've ever had the experience where if I'm using something like ngmin and ngmin didn't catch some of the annotations, and you want to find out, is that going to fail in production? Well, the strict mode in DI is your friend. You can check that out. And then one of the last big features we did in this set was this thing called ngModel options, where we can debounce updates from ngModel. On the Angular Dart side, a little more activity here. We've over 150, actually about 150 pull requests were changed. We did a giant renaming. Almost everything you care about has a new, simpler, hopefully more, a better name that you can remember. So if you've been working on Angular Dart, there's some work to update too. There is some new syntax, some of our new thoughts about the way we do templates. One of them is in templates, we now have this bind dash syntax that you can prefix your attributes with, so that from the template you can say, I want to use an expression here. We've had a request that, so by default, we've been using Shadow DOM, one of the new standards under the web components umbrella. Some folks have requested that we allow you to write components without Shadow DOM, and we now have this option. There's 20 more features, actually over 20 features, and a lot of dramatic performance enhancements, where we've actually seen seconds taken off from application startup time in some of our internal applications. So it's short and sweet for May. I'm going to let Jon come up and talk about Synth. Thanks, everybody.
Hello. Thanks a lot, Brad, for that introduction. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. It's a real thrill to be talking to everybody today. Where's my presentation? OK. Thanks also to Christina for managing the whole meetup. I'm really excited to be introducing Synth. So when I ran into Brad at ngConf back in January, I already started working on Synth. The idea behind it was a Node.js web framework for the back end that is designed to make it easier to create and manage AngularJS apps. And as it happens, it also could, in theory, work just as well for Ember and Backbone. So that's a cool plus, too. And when I was pitching it to him, I was working on it, and I said, and I also have this one other idea for it, where it could preload data with a web app. And his eyes light up, and he got all excited about it. He said, once you have that working, come talk to me, and then you can present it at the meetup. And so, a man of my word, here I am. So Synth is still in an early state. I've been working on it alone in my spare time. I haven't used it to run any major applications other than the sample application that's running at synthjs.com. So I'm here today to present it to the world for basically the first time in order to gather feedback from you, both feedback in terms of whether this is a crazy good idea or a crazy bad idea. I have a feeling it's crazy. I don't know if it's the good or the bad kind just yet. So I don't know if maybe I bit off more than I can chew or what, but basically I'll get into the features that it provides, and these are features that separate it from other Node.js web frameworks like Express. So just to introduce, I thought I deleted this slide, but we're just building CRUD apps. We're making all web apps here, so the web framework is to enable us to make better Angular CRUD apps. So let's get to the features. So one of the first big features is that it makes it easier to install backend and front-end packages. So for the backend, it uses NPM, because that's where all the backend packages are. And for front-end, it uses Bower. And I can show you later how it makes it easier. But for now, that's one of the features and goals of it. Then we have the ability to launch in dev mode and production mode. And what this means is that when running the server in dev mode, all of your assets, all your JavaScript files and your CSS files are all loaded separately and unmolested. In production mode, it minifies them and concatenates them and gives you one file and breaks all of your dependency injection. But in this case, it uses ngmin, so hopefully most of those cases will be automatically annotated for you. The next goal of it is to make it really easy to make a RESTful API. So all Angular apps depend upon a JSON API of some sort. And I found myself, when I was making Angular apps, that I was constantly writing a lot more lines of code than I felt like I needed to. And so a goal of it was to reduce the amount of lines of code to produce the backend API that serves an Angular app. Another thing I noticed is when I was trying to introduce developing on AngularJS on top of a Node backend powered by Express, I was trying to introduce this to some new programmers, and they were confused by the JavaScript code. Where was it running? Was it in the backend? Was it the front end? You had this public folder that was kind of like the front end, perhaps, but then you also had views that were not in public. They were rendered on the backend, therefore they were not in public. So it was really confusing. So the Synth application has opinions about where your code goes. So it's very clear that you have backend code inside the back folder, and you have front-end code inside the front folder. So that was another thing. And also, I built it on top of standard Node.js libraries like Express. The idea being that there's all these other great existing tools out there that I can leverage, yay open source, and also the idea of convention over configuration. So Synth is opinionated and does a lot of things automatically out of the box, but the idea is you can still go to these underlying tools and make your changes there and have full control of your application as well. So there's a Synth command for installing front-end packages for you, but you can also do cd front, and then now you're in the front folder, and then you can do Bower install or Bower or whatever. And so you still have access to the underlying technologies. And then last but not least, this is the one that got Brad excited, was the ability to load a view's data in HTML. And I'm going to spend the next few slides explaining the idea behind that. So traditional web apps, as a lot of you are familiar with, have tools like Rails or Django or even Express and its server-side rendering. A user goes to a URL. The HTML is then combined with the data, and then the final HTML is sent back to the user. It's displayed in the browser. The user interacts with it, and then the process repeats. A whole new web page is loaded each time the user interacts with the web app. And I'm sure most of you know that Angular fixes that problem, but it has this new problem. So now, when the user first goes to the web app, say you were to click a URL for a tweet, if you were to go to the website, the web app should know the data for the tweet to return to the user. But with an Angular-powered app, it would return just the layout HTML that lists what JavaScript files should be loaded. And it might have, if it's a decently sized Angular app, it might have an ng-view directive in there saying the view data should go here, but then there's no data. So that's a downside, because then there's this extra trip that it has to take to get the data, and then another trip, too, that's needed to get the view. But once that's all done, there's just data moving across the pipe, and the whole web page doesn't need to be refreshed as the user interacts. So that's really good. So Synth tries to fix the problem by getting the best of both worlds, where the server returns upon the initial visit the layout HTML, plus it has the data that would have been requested from the API, but basically makes it available to the Angular application as a global variable. And then it also makes the HTML view also available from within the HTML. I'll show you on the next slide exactly how that happens. You're probably wondering how is it sent. Actually, before that, let me show you the benefits of doing it. So this is the timeline of loading up the example Synth app that I have running at synthjs.com. This is with the preloading feature disabled. It renders in 607 milliseconds. That's actually pretty good, considering, not considering, it's pretty good because this test is a best case scenario where I was sitting at home in San Mateo, which isn't very far from San Francisco, and the server was sitting in San Francisco running at DigitalOcean. And so this had to do a couple of round trips to get the final data rendered. It took 607 milliseconds. And then, boom. With the preloading, it saves 17% of the load time, which is pretty good, in my opinion. I think that makes a big difference. But it makes an even bigger difference if the user was experiencing high latency. Say, for example, they were on mobile on a cell network, or if the user is in Europe or China and the server's in America or something like that, the benefits just go up from here. So how does this preloading actually work? How do you send both the HTML and the data to the user in one go? So here's what a typical Angular HTML layout would look like. So hopefully most of you here would recognize this, where you have your header, which specifies your CSS and your JavaScript. And then in the body, you have a div of type ngView. And then further HTML basically will be injected by Angular into that view. And those views will be combined with data it fetches from an API. So Synth instead will return this. Let's focus it a bit. OK, so it added to that view we saw before this script tag in the header of preloaded data. So if you're loading up a bunch of tweets, it would just basically assign to the preloaded data variable what that content is. Very simple. And then below, for preloading the HTML view, take advantage of this feature that a lot of people don't know about, which is you can preload a view inside of a script tag of type text/ng template. So this is an Angular feature. And when the Angular route provider sees that you have the script tag of the ID of the path it would have gone to, instead of actually fetching that HTML file, it just uses what's inside the script tag. In this case, it's HTML. So at this point, if this is returned to the client, then the client has everything it needs to render the page. It doesn't need to make any extra trips to the server unless it needs JavaScript files or CSS files. But luckily, those are often cached and served from CDNs. So this here is a naive example of how the preloaded data might be used. This is kind of heavy-handed here in that you don't want to have this much logic in your controller, because you can imagine that if you had a web app with 10 controllers, you don't have to be doing this. If there's preloaded data, use it, else go to the API. So I'm going to show you later in the demo how to put this into a service. But for right now, I'm just going to walk through it very quickly. So at the start of the controller, it checks to see if there's this global variable preloaded data. And if there is, it will use it. So it just attaches it to the scope, to the model. And then it nullifies the preloaded data so that if another controller is loaded in the same session, it doesn't fall into the trap of using another view's preloaded data. And then otherwise, say you're the second controller that gets loaded in the same session, it doesn't have preloaded data. So what it does, it then goes to the API and gets the data the old-fashioned way that we all know. But as I mentioned, a better way to write your controller is if you could do it like this, where you had data as a service. Basically, data is injected into your controller by the route provider. And at this point, the controller is not even run until the data is available, whether it's preloaded data or if it's from the API. So now it's time to show you the demo, show you an app written in with Synth. And let me just show you quickly our example app. I'll first start Synth here. So Synth is a command line tool, just kind of like Express or Rails, provides some handy things. So if you do Synth S or Synth server, it launches it in development mode. So this thing on port 3000. Let me refresh. And so here's our list of tweets auto-generated from Hipster Ipsum. So if we take a look at the source code of this, we'll see at the top of it we have this preloaded data that has this giant object basically fed to it. And then at the bottom, we have the script tag that has the view preloaded in there. And then here, if we load up the network view, when we load the page, you can see that it doesn't make an API call or an extra HTML call. It's all in the original call. And you can even see that the JavaScript files are all cached anyways. So that's big savings right there. So I'm going to, in this demo, demonstrate adding a feature and showing you how to use it. But before I do that, I just want to show off quickly the cool feature of Angular that allows you to save time in the controller there. So here's the front app.js. So this is the first JavaScript file that's getting loaded after the dependencies like Angular. And in here, we have our route provider where we define our routes, including our redirects. And so we have our /tweets route defined with our URL for the view, which is preloaded. And then we have this resolve thing here. This is a new feature that I didn't know about actually until last week when Brian on the AngularJS team mentioned it to me. And I was like, yeah, that would totally make Synth just so much better and easier to use. So what this does here is this will actually call a service every single time this particular controller is loaded. And so this service does exactly what I showed you in that previous slide, where it checks for the preloaded data and nullifies it and returns it. And otherwise, it makes a request to the API via the HTTP service. And nice thing here is this: if the service returns a promise, then Angular will wait until the promise is resolved before actually calling the controller. So that's really cool. And also, if you just return if you have the data and you can just return it directly, it'll then launch the controller. So that's pretty neat. So now is where probably I should explain a bit the directory structure of a Synth app. So Synth, I think I may have mentioned this before, is pretty opinionated. And it has opinions about where things should be to keep everything in its place. And so we have a CSS folder where you have your CSS files. They can be SCSS, Sass files. That could be stylus. And then we have our HTML files. So this is where you would put your particular views. And these would be static files, like getIndex. Let me delete this. I was supposed to add that later. Cool. So we have our getIndex. We have our images folder. You have your JavaScript folder and your miscellaneous. And the thing to note for the miscellaneous one is that this one's a little special in that the files put here will be available from the root of your web application. So if you want a robots.txt or a favicon.ico or something like that, you put it in here, and then these files will be available at the root and will be untouched by Synth when it's served up. Another thing to point out is we have manifest files, so you can control which assets get loaded and in what order. So for JavaScript, we have our JS files folder, which shows here that AngularJS and Angular route.js are loaded from Bower components. And then we have our main front application, followed by the particular controller JavaScript file. And the same thing goes for the CSS. Here we just happen to have one CSS file. And Synth will automatically precompile it. And then, so that's the front end. And that one, in my opinion, is pretty straightforward. You know, a lot of you probably have similar directory structures for your applications as well. The next thing is the backend. So the backend is a little different. And as I said earlier in the presentation, a big goal of Synth is to make it easier to create a RESTful API. So an idea I came up with to make it easier is if you just create your API using a directory structure. So inside the resources folder, you create folders for each resource you want. And then you can nest them within there too. So we have a tweets resource, which will become available at /API/tweets. And so the tweets folder makes that available, and Synth will automatically generate that route. And then you can just fill up as many JavaScript files in there as you want. You can name them whatever you want. The key thing is that you then make available various request handlers by creating public methods that you expose. So for example, here we have the API call that gave the front end there a list of tweets. And so getIndex is a special name. So the names that you give these methods are important. So this one says that if there's a get call to the index of a resource, it should do this. And so this is the thing that gets called. And then what we have here is some more weirdness and difference than what you might be used to. In this case, it's returning a promise. You can tell that by the then call here. So another way of saving time is instead of calling the usual response object and talking to the response object and saying, response, set the status to this, and set the return content type to JSON. Instead of doing all that, why don't we just return the data or return a promise that eventually returns the data, and then it'll automatically provide a JSON response. So that's what's going on here. I'm using here a MongoDB library driver that supports promises, where you can specify your collection, do a find, sort it by the date that the tweet was created, limit it to 100 tweets, and then this actually the toArray executes the call, which will then return a promise that eventually returns an array, the array being data, and then we want to return eventually to the user a object with tweets pointing to an array of tweets. So that's what this does here. And the DB is just attached to the request. So how about I show you how I do that next? So here is the base module for the backend application. And at the start of it, we basically require Synth, as if you would require Express or something similar. We then connect to our database, as you would with any database driver. And then here, Synth provides to you the raw Express application. So Synth has been required, but it hasn't been initialized yet. And before it's initialized, it's just a raw Express application. And so you can define middleware on there using the .use. So what we have here is a middleware where we make the database available to every request that comes in. So a middleware in this case being a function that's called before every request that occurs. So every request that comes in will have this database attached to the request. And then here at the bottom, we initialize Synth by basically calling it. And that returns the Express app. But now the Express app has all these API resource endpoints attached to it. So when you initialize it, it went through the resources folder. It read all the tweets files. It picked out all the various methods and request handlers, attached them. It also set up the routes for the front end. So it knows about the JavaScript folder and the CSS folder. And so at that point, it returns the app. And by attaching it to module.exports here, the Synth command line tool now can then launch it as a server. You could, of course, go in here and change it so that you launch it by hand with a .list. And let's save questions to the end, if possible. OK. So let's add a feature. I know that was a big information dump there. So let's try to keep it simple by adding a feature. So what's a thing that we're missing from here? So it's nice to see these auto-generated tweets, but it'd be a lot more fun if we could tweet ourselves. Now, we don't have accounts just yet. We're keeping this simple. So how about just anonymous tweets being added? So I like to start, when doing features like this, to start from the back end. So let's go to our tweets resource. I could add it to this file, or I can add a second file inside the tweets folder. But for simplicity, I'll just stay in the same file. And so basically, if you're going to make a tweet, it's probably going to be a post call. This is a create RESTful call. So we'll do post. And just by calling it post, now there is a post request handler waiting at /API/tweets. So function it takes the request object and response object, and then we will return the result of doing an insert into the tweets collection. Insert, where we'll specify the content of the tweet. This is just a field in Mongo. We'll take it from the body of the request. So rec.body is how you would get at the body of a JSON post call using Express. And so that's available there. And then we'll also give it a date that it was created at, and we'll just say now. And this is how you do a now date in JavaScript. And that's it. So now we have our backend for creating a tweet. It's basically just one line of code, expanded out into more lines to make it more readable, but it's one statement, really. And I think that's pretty fun to do it that way. You, of course, can extend it out further by the fact that this returns promises, and you can do a .then, or you can put things in front of the return, but it's all there for you. So now we have an ability to do a post, and also notes that Synth detected that a file was changed and restarted the server. So that's cool too. Okay, now on the front end, we need to add a method to our controller so that it knows to make that API call. So let's add a publish method. Function. And so here what it would do is call the HTTP service with a post. And we'll say it goes to /API/tweets. And then we'll pass in the content. And what is the content? Well, we'll take it from a new model that's not yet created, but we'll create it soon. So this here will make the post call. Afterwards, though, we would like to show it. So let's just show the results. Oh, I just went over the 80 point. Oh, well. So now we have a result, and we'll just add it to the list of tweets. We'll do an unshift. In other words, add it to the front of the tweets array, where we say result.data is added to unshift there. And also, it's handy to empty out the new tweet model after it's been posted so that we don't accidentally submit the same tweet twice. Same tweet twice. Say that 10 times fast. All right. OK, so the last thing we're missing now is the HTML view where it has a text area and a button that would actually call this publish function. So for that, we go to our HTML. We go to our get index, and we will add a text area where the ng model is new tweet. There we go. And then we need a way of firing it off. So we'll add a button with an ng click, and it calls publish. And we'll say here, publish. I normally don't put exclamation marks at the end of my calls, but hey, it's a presentation. Let's go wild. There we go. And so now if we refresh the page moment of truth, there it is. And we can say, hello, Angular meetup at Google. Cool. Publish. Oh, there it is. And more importantly, we refresh it. It's there. And if you look at the source, our tweet is right at the top. OK, so that actually worked. So breath of fresh air there. So that was me adding basically a simple feature to a simple web app. Now, what if I wanted to add some extra styling to this? I know it's kind of ugly right now with the black background and the white text. That's because a lot of projectors and on live streaming, they're not very good at contrast. So this is showing some good contrast. And the publish button looks kind of plain. A lot of people these days, they spruce up their buttons with Bootstrap. Unfortunately, Bootstrap is an external dependency. I don't have it right now. But luckily with Synth, I can just go synth install -f for the front end. It's a front end package. And type Bootstrap. And what it should hopefully do is hit Bower up, ask for Bootstrap and its dependencies, install them, add them to the bower.json so that they'll be available for anyone else who wants to deploy the app, and add it to the manifest files so they get loaded by the front end. So hopefully all of that just occurred right now. So let's take a look in the Bower components. we have Bootstrap and jQuery. jQuery is a dependency of Bootstrap. Now let's take a look at our Bower JSON. Yeah, they've been added there. That's good. What about our manifest files? Oh, good. So in our JS manifest file, jQuery is loaded first, and then Bootstrap, and then everything else. So that's really handy there as well. Also, our CSS, we haven't forgotten about you. The CSS is also auto-added to the manifest. Let's restart our server and take a look. And so things kind of shift around a bit. Bootstrap has some default settings. Our publish button is looking a little better, but it could look a lot better. Let's just do something I'm sure many of you have done many times. Just add a class to it to tell Bootstrap to take over. btn-defaults, like that, and boom, we have our Bootstrap button right there. Yay! Okay, cool. So a big part of Twitter is being able to link directly to a tweet. Right now, we can't do that. And that's actually one of the big use cases for doing the server-side rendering, is so that when you first go to a page, it's all right there for you. And a big example of that is with Twitter, and when you go to a particular tweet, to have it right there. So let's now go from the front backwards. So here, let's linkify our date and have it go backwards. So ng href will equal slash tweets, and then slash the particular tweet's ID. Yeah, that'll do. Let's do that. Okay, close that. Did I get that right? No, I didn't. I forgot an angle bracket. Thanks. Why didn't anyone tell me? You're just leaving me hanging here. All right. So yeah, we now have a link, and you can't see in the status bar, but we have URL. And when we just click it, oh well. Angular knows to otherwise send you back to /tweet. So it's not there. Oh well. Okay, so how do we make that available to the Angular route provider? So we go to front app. We have our when tweets, but let's add our when /tweets /ID. We'll have our template URL /html/tweet/get.html. And we'll say our controller is the tweet controller. These aren't great names, but it'll do. And then we'll also copy this resolve thing so that data is loaded the right way. If there's anyone working on AngularJS here, it'd be really cool if you could assign resolve automatically to all the controllers. I'll raise an issue on GitHub later. Cool. So now we have our routes there. We'll just add the controller to this file. So we'll say controller, tweet controller. Function, it needs a scope and data at the least. Don't forget your semicolons. So here we would say scope.tweet equals data. Cool. Yeah, I think that's it. It's pretty short. So now all we're missing is the backend, the thing that actually fetches the tweet and returns it. So we can overload this file, or we can add a new one. So we do you call it single tweet, just to show off that the name of the file doesn't matter. It's the folders it's in, those names matter. So for our single tweet file, we'll say exports.get. So unlike getIndex, get will listen for when a request is made to the resource with a number basically hanging off past the slash. I'll show you that in a second. So function, rec and res, a request object and response object. We're going to do a return, just like we did before. And we're going to get it from the database. We're going to get it from the collection of tweets. We're going to do a find one call. And from there, how are we going to find it? Well, let's look it up by ID. And how do you get an ID with Mongo? You have to use their special objects ID method to cast a string into the right type. And that is passed in via the params. And that is params.id, like that. So that's it. Hopefully this will now just work. Cross your fingers. So if you go back here, refresh, click a link. Oh, we're missing our view. Hold on a sec. So we have our front app. It's pointing to a get.html, but we don't actually have a get.html yet. I deleted that earlier. That was a mistake. So let's add it now. Get.html. And we can show the content just by saying tweets.content, like that. Keep it very simple. Let's try again. Oh, yay! So we click the particular tweet. You can see in the URL, this is the ID of the tweet, and that automatically gets parsed by Synth. If we go back, here's our main list of tweets. You click any particular link. You can send it to people however you like. And then once they click on it, it gets loaded, all preloaded. And I'll show you again, just because it's pretty fun to show, that it's all auto-loaded ahead of time, and that it's not hitting the API or getting any extra HTML views. So that is it for the demo. I think we still have a lot of time. We'll leave that for the questions. So let's get back into the presentation. So just to give you a bit of idea of where the stage of the application is at and where it's going. So right now, it's in early stages. It's functionally all there, but I would consider it alpha since it hasn't been deployed anywhere on a large scale. It should be fine. It's built upon other well-known and well-trusted technologies like Express, Node, things like that. All the source code is available on GitHub. But what I want is if adventurous folk in the audience, if they're interested in trying it out and raising issues and letting me know things they like about it, things they want different, if they think it should work a different way, if it does too much, does too little, anything is good. One thing I want to add is Gulp Integration, because right now Synth is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of figuring out how to pre-process the assets. And so if you have certain assets in a format that it doesn't know about, so right now it has built-in support for CoffeeScript and JavaScript, but not Dart, for example. You might want to precompile Dart into JavaScript, for example. So it'd be cool if we could leave it up to the user to decide how those things occur. I'd also like to add user authentication and security with CSRF, since nearly every web app needs that, and maybe that could be abstracted away. Still thinking through different ideas on how that would work. And I just want to continue polishing it, lowering the memory footprint, and just in general getting it ready for production. And of course, we can't forget about documentation to help people learn about it and spread the word. So that's basically it. Thanks everybody for coming out and for listening about Synth.
Awesome. We will take questions. We'll do it by microphone. For those of you who have to leave on the bus, it's going to leave out of this side of the building, which is a little different than previous weeks. So one other announcement before you go. We do have some food left. We have to-go boxes, and we would love you to take some home. All right, questions, folks? And we have a couple. All right, maybe back there, Chireo has a microphone, and then we'll go over here.
Hey, thanks for presenting. It's actually crazy but good idea, I think.
Thanks.
Anyway, how do you define which data to preload and which not?
That's an excellent question. So the question is, how do I decide which data to preload? And so that is, and I shouldn't have closed my laptop. I could probably demonstrate things with it. On the URL. So here the URL is /tweets and then an ID. So Synth makes an assumption that you're going for the tweets resource, and it then will use the number afterwards as the ID. And it assumes that if there is any embedded resources, then it would be after the ID itself. So say if there was commenting after tweets, it would then be comments. And so this would get the comments for the tweets. And so that's how it figures out the data. So the resources is based on the URL here. And then for it to figure out which HTML view you're requesting, then it takes the extra step here when I go to, this is the get index. I know it's kind of hard to read based on the size of the text in the sidebar there, but basically, again, you structure your data the way that Synth expects it, and it'll pull it out. If you don't structure it the way Synth expects, and it just won't preload it. But it should hopefully still work if you design your app the right way. So here we have our /tweet/getIndex and our /get. So it knows that if you are requesting the resource without an ID, it uses getIndex. If you're requesting the resource with an ID, it uses get. That's basically it. You have your get and your getIndex HTML files. Does that answer your question? Good.
Over here.
So I want to ask is about how you to, I think preloaded data is a way to caching data.
So the question is there a way to cache the data?
Yeah. So I think in my mind, it seems something way to cache data. So do you provide a way to, can we just set a caching policy in the response, in the server side?
Yeah. So it depends on what you're getting at there. So you could, of course, just put in caching right into your request handler. Don't go to the database. Instead, hit the cache. That's one form of caching. But in terms of caching the actual entire view response, probably not at this point. I'm not sure how that would actually work, and it would kind of defeat the point of using this. So in that case, yeah, there wouldn't be caching of the data at that level, not at the client side. It would be cached, more on the back end server side.
Okay. So how can I just manually update the preload data? So I think currently you are using one way is called a resolve.
Yeah.
So resolve is the same that we will send the request maybe some maybe just every second or something like that. So how can I manually control it? Maybe for some data I want is updated very frequently. Maybe some data I maybe it's a long time I don't need to update.
So in that case, there's a lot of different schemes specific to Angular for caching data to avoid hitting the API, using things like local storage and stuff like that. But that wouldn't save you from your initial load here, where the data is included right in the initial HTML layout. So there's no way to avoid the data being put in there if you use this schema. But if you want to save on the trips to the API after this has been loaded, say the user is then interacting and hitting other views, at that point, there's other schemes available for doing the caching. And I'm not too familiar with them myself, but I'm sure lots of people here could help you in that sense.
Okay, thank you.
You have one over there, Trey?
Hi, thanks for your work on this.
Oh, thank you.
Express is great, but why Express? Why not Koa or Happy or some other framework?
OK. Other backend frameworks. The easy answer, and probably the more truthful one, is I'm familiar with Express. I already know how to use it. So there's that. In terms of why not Koa, which is the new framework from the same guy who created Express, it's very interesting, but it's still kind of early days. It requires you to use the unstable branch of Node and enable the Harmony feature set for ES6. So that's not quite ready yet. There's no reason why I can't make use of it. I think it'd be a pretty cool thing to try to make use of it once it's more stable. As of right now, Express works fine. And also, more people are familiar with it, too. So that's another benefit of using Express. Thanks for the question.
OK, maybe over here.
Two questions, actually. The first question is, the preloaded data variable is global variable in your example. Can I avoid it? Is there a better way of doing it inside Angular closure?
So if there's a better way for your web application, say, the reason why this feature is not using some kind of Angular-y thing, like creating an Angular module that then makes it available and everything's nicely scoped in context and stuff. The reason I didn't do that for this simple example is because I'd like to make this usable for other frameworks as well. So this works really well with Angular, but there's no reason why it can't work with Ember and Backbone. But if you want to make changes to it, you could go to your file, which is in your application. It's not in Synth, it's in your application. And here you can define how the data is rendered. So in here, you could create an Angular module and have the data put in there, and then
Right.
you then inherit it from your main module.
Thank you. Just one more question. That's fine, right? My fellow JavaScript developers are very interested in isomorphic architecture, and for that reason, they hate Angular for some reason, because they cannot run Angular on the server side as easily as Backbone and Ember. And also, I haven't been able to find really good framework that runs Angular on the server side. I'm very curious about what was your breakthrough?
So it actually doesn't run Angular on the server side. So that's the breakthrough is to not. So what it doesn't do is render the page completed on the server side. What it does is it lets Angular do what it does best, which is render on the front end. But what it does is it provides the pieces needed for Angular to do that at once. So it provides you the Angular layout, which includes things like ngView right here. So it provides you the ngView. It provides the JavaScript files. It provides the data that Angular then pulls in. And it also provides the particular preloaded HTML view as well. So whether this could be leveraged to render on the back end as well, I don't know.
What's your general opinion on isomorphic architecture?
It feels kind of weird to me. Maybe I haven't spent enough time with it to provide a good sense of it. But I actually had a question for anyone who works here at Google. If I preload the HTML and the data here, would that help with your Google PageRank at all? If it's there in one shot, if it requires less rendering, if the content is in there somewhere. Don't want to put anyone on the spot. Come up and talk to me later. That'd be an interesting bullet point to stick on there if it actually helped at all.
Over here. Here, we'll go right here.
So I think it's a pretty crazy idea, but I think it has some really good points in it. I really like the preloading the data. I think that's brilliant. And you can use it without Synth if you want, I think. This is just a schema. Regarding Synth and this very tight structure about front end and back end, what are your opinions on sharing code in the front end and the back end?
I obviously don't like it. I put them in separate folders for a reason. I think Meteor is a fantastic framework and it's really cool, and that is an even crazier idea than Synth. But I found it very confusing when I was trying it out and playing with it. Perhaps I was using it wrong or something. Maybe I should check it out now. Maybe it's a lot easier to use or something. But I found it, just the ability to have the same code run both in the front end and the back end, I found that kind of scary. Maybe I'm old-fashioned or something. So here I purposely kept them separate, because I think it's important to know what code is sent to a client and what code is running safely in the back end, protected from the client. So I think for a sense of security and maybe even performance, it's good to know where the code is running at any given time.
Okay.
Thanks for the question.
You want to go next door there?
Regarding the page that you get information of a single tweet, wouldn't it be better going to the service and get the tweets that are already there, like using the ID and get the Twitter there instead of going to the server?
So the question is, instead of going to the server, I'm already at the main list of tweets. Hold on a sec. So we're at our main list of tweets. And so if I click a particular one, why does it have to go to the API to get that tweet? It's already right there. Why not just use that? The answer to that is basically any real-world API beyond a simple example like this will have different information once you go to a particular resource item as opposed to a list of them. Usually the lists will have a slimmed down view of a particular tweet. So for example, here the tweets are the content and the date. And there's nothing more to show. It's very simple. But on the real Twitter, you have your content, your date, your number of favorites, the number of retweets, and information on and on, top 10 replies underneath it, things like that. So the nature of them is a little different. And then on top of that, it requires a lot of logic to know, which tweets are available and which ones aren't. Like you could have links here that don't even show any content at all. It's just a list of IDs, and you click it, and it takes you to it. So there's nothing to render in that case. So that's the main reason behind it. Another reason maybe is just I never thought of that idea. it sounds really neat. But thanks for the question.
Well, first I wanted to say, thanks for the demo. I really like the approach. It relates to a performance problem I'm currently dealing with, and it's a well-structured approach to a common problem.
Thanks.
My question is regarding your use of the folders for the REST API. So what if there was a particular resource that might be accessible via more than one path? So you might, let's say, for example, customer/orders versus just orders, for example.
So the question is, what if there was a resource that was a little bit more complicated and had multiple paths? Sure, you can make those paths. So here we have our tweets path, basically. This is /tweets/whatever. So we have our get index and we have our post. What if you wanted to have a custom action in this case? Say you want to get a expanded tweet. If we had, an expanded bit of information, so you could just add here exports.get expanded, and continue on from there. And so this will create a route of /API/tweets/expanded, and that would be an extra custom action put on there. If you're talking about what if you want to have two resources that interact with the same part of the database, perhaps, then you could just create another folder, and inside the code there, you just tell the code to go to the same part of the database. So the accessing of the database is all within there. If you have a specific schema you want to use, like using Postgres or Mongoose or something like that, you can use that as well. So it's all up to you.
So you mentioned that Synth is a very opinionated framework. I was hoping you could elaborate on, for instance, the preloaded data, right? You can change that variable.
Right.
Can you elaborate on other things that the developer can change at will?
Sure. So the question is, what other things can the developer configure beyond what is given at the default? So off the top of my head, the big part, there's two main files that need to be changed to have a lot of control. So the first one is your index.jade. So this is like a thing that this is the one part of the front end that's actually rendered on the back end. So this is a bit of a cheat. So it's in the front folder, but it's actually invoked by the back end, rendered, and then given to the browser. So you have full control here. Say you don't want preloading of HTML, then boom, it's gone. No preloading of HTML. Or if you want to, or maybe if Ember has a different way of telling the framework that there's a way to preload it. I'm not sure what that is. I'm not too familiar with Ember, but you can change that here. So there's that. We have a preloading data. One thing too is like here on the command line, I showed you how to install Bootstrap using Synth and how it did all these automatic things. It added it to the manifest files. It added to bower.json. What if you want to use Bower directly? Well, you can just go cd front. Now, when you take a look at it, you have your bower.json and your Bower components. Bower's like, I know how to deal with this. So then you can just invoke Bower, and you can remove Bootstrap or install other things directly, and it won't take over and edit your manifest files and things like that. Similarly, on the back end, if you go to back, you have your node modules. So npm now knows how to run within this folder. Another thing, so in our backend here, we return the result of the synth init call. So what this does is it initializes synth, it creates all those endpoints, and then it returns the express app. Well, what if you want to just say app equals that, and then you could do app.listen, and so on, like you would with any express app. You could do that, but then once you did that, you would no longer be able to do synth s to run it, because synth is expecting an app to be returned to it. So you just go, well, you're already in your back folder, so you would just say like node back app like that, and you're good. And then it would work at that point. And so if you have your own deploy scripts and you want to manage it that way, you can.
So to piggy off that, do you have any plans for adding like a configuration file so that you don't have to change things in all these different places? You just have one go-to spot?
So is there plans for a configuration file for changing these things? So I do have a configuration file. What remains as a question at the moment is what would go in there and what is configurable. So I'm planning to leave the back application like this for now, so that if you did want to manage it yourself, you could could just make that change like you did right there, and it would work just fine. I have a place for the configuration. It's in synth.json. Right now, it's just a name and a version, and the name is injected into the index.jade rendering file. But I have plans in the future to add configuration like having a base resource. So it's kind of awkward that the tweets is at /tweets. Shouldn't it be at /nothing and you see your tweets? So you could elevate maybe the tweets resource as your base resource, and maybe you could add something like, base resource is tweets, like that, and then that just changes the API so it's at the base, and then all the other resources are available as you would. So that's an idea I'm thinking about implementing. Also, I mentioned earlier about using Gulp. And so right now, Synth has all the asset pre-compilation and minification and all that jazz deeply integrated into it. And so I'd like to break that out and put it into a Gulp file that's sitting in the back folder that defines all those recipes for doing that stuff, so that if you, for example, don't want ngmin in there, then you can remove it from there. Or if you wanted to add ng-annotate instead, which does a similar thing to ngmin, then you can stick that in there. Or compile Dart or add less, or and so on. It just gives you more ability to configure. Thanks for the question.
Hi. My opinion, crazy good idea.
Crazy good? Did I hear you right? Good. Thanks.
Just one suggestion. I think that could be helpful to also provide a service in the front end that would also look like for the cache in your synth JSON. You could have a flag which be true or false, like cache. If cache is set to true, you don't go to the backend in the example that you showed before when you click on the tweet. And because, for example, in our scenario, we are using Angular, and we have a set of data that the likelihood for that to be updated is not high, like in maybe 1 week. So it would be really nice that if we can have some kind of service, Angular service provided by your framework that would look at the caching strategy and not go to the server when not needed. But it's just an idea. Obviously, we have a challenge to your other supported frameworks like Backbone, and maybe you have to write Backbone service or whatever.
Right. Actually, that was a good suggestion. Maybe have caching built into Synth too. Second one to bring it up, so I guess it's pretty popular. So that's neat. Something definitely worth looking into. You mentioned then supporting the other frameworks. There's actually one feature here that I skipped over, which is the fact that in Synth itself, I can define different templates. So when you create a new Synth project, you can specify, for the front end, I want Angular. And for the back end, I want Ember. Currently, there's only an Angular template, and it's the default, because I'm familiar with Angular, and that's what I've been developing with. But there's a lot of people using Ember and Backbone. So if anyone wants to write a pull request to add those as templates to make available from the command line, that'd be super awesome. And so I also have backend templates as well. So right now, the default backend template and the only backend template is Mongo. But I'd like to add support for other databases like Rethink or Postgres or even Redis or something like that. You name it. We could have all the templates we want. But all of those are still usable by you. Once you create your app, you can swap out all the code that you want. You can start an AngularJS app, rip out Angular, put in Ember. That's totally fine. So this is just a convenience thing for creating a new app.
OK, maybe one more question, and then we'll go to one-on-one out of the group setting. And maybe back there.
OK, so actually, I had a couple questions. I've been waiting here. First, a quick one. What is the call to update a item? Is it going to be update or something?
To update, so the question is, how do you update a resource, basically? So I showed you how to get an index of tweets, how to create a tweet, and how to get a particular tweet. So two things missing there were how do you change a tweet and how do you delete a tweet. So as we all know, we're making CRUD apps here. So that's an excellent question. So if you look at our tweets file here, if you want to update one, you put. And then now we're listening to put method calls. Okay. And then in here, you then write the Mongo call for updating a tweet. And then delete the same way as you could just do delete.
Okay, and yeah, okay. So you also mentioned how to add an action to a collection, but how do you add an action to an item?
So I showed how to add an action to a collection.
Yeah.
How do I add an action?
When you said this is a custom view and it would go at /tweets/this thing, that's just adding on the collection. How do you add it to an item?
So for that, I don't have that yet, basically. Oh. A workaround for that would be to add like a nested resource. And then if you wanted to get on it, you could say get index on the nested resource. That's almost like having a custom action for a get. And would work for post. But in terms of the put and get, those automatically expect an ID to be passed in. So you wouldn't be able to do that.
How does it know a resource should be nested?
So if you add a nested resource here, like say we added comments, we say comments is a folder inside of tweets. And then we can just say my code.js. Never call a file my code.js.
And then you'd get index here, I guess?
Yeah, and then so here you would just say exports.get index and so on. And then this would return you an array of comments that belong to a particular tweet. And in fact, you might be asking, if you were thinking that far along the lines, how do I get the ID of a tweet for this particular comment? So here, I might as well just write the whole thing. So it's rec.db.collection of comments. So it might be a separate collection here. And we would do .find. And we would say, our tweet ID. So if we have a comment that points to a particular tweet ID, rec.params.tweetsID. So we saw back single tweet. The ID is available from rec.params ID. So if you're in the resource that is particularly being requested, then it's just .id. But if you're in a nested one, then it takes on the name of the particular parent. That way you can have multiple nested resources, and each parent or grandparent would have its own name that you would reference with ID afterwards. And then for the actual tweet itself, you could reference just rec.params.id if you're getting a particular comment.
All right. So I also have a harder question. So when you actually, this is just sort of a confusion actually. When you click on the link that goes to an individual tweet, is that doing a full page load? Or is that using Angular's routing system?
It's using Angular's routing system. So the question is, if I click on a particular tweet, so here we have the web app loaded, and I click a tweet here, what happens? So Angular intercepts the click. It hits the API. The route provider is handling all of this. We can even show you the network activity to see what's happening. OK, not sure what that's about. Let's clear it.
Is there an individual tweet service? I missed if
you
actually...
I added a separate tweet controller. So if I click here, I'm actually not running the server. Whoops. Let's go back to it and restart it. OK. Whatever list of tweets, clear that out. If I click this one, it's just going to hit the API and get the particular view. It's not going to reload the entire page. So here, it hit the API, got the view. That's it. And then when we refresh it, then it's doing a full page load. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Can I see was there a service?
So maybe some of these questions are getting deep. I invite you to come up and chat more. There may be many more questions. And I think we'll all be around here for a while. So let's give Jon a hand. And thanks, everybody. Please continue the conversation. We're going to be here for a while.